In a bombshell announcement on Monday, the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, said he has applied for arrest warrants to be issued against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his defense minister, as well as 3 Hamas leaders, for a range of war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's a major intervention by the ICC prosecutor, dubbed a watershed event in international legal history, as the ICC has never before indicted a Western or Western-aligned leader. This naturally raises a lot of questions that we'll cover in this video, like what just happened, where do things go from here, and could Netanyahu, or indeed the others, soon be hauled in front of judges in The Hague? Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop when we release new videos. First, let's clear something up. The ICC's chief prosecutor has applied for the arrest warrants, but the decision to actually issue the warrants is now up to a pre-trial panel of 3 ICC judges, who may take weeks or even a couple of months to decide. For reference, it took about 24 days for the Vladimir Putin arrest warrant to be approved and issued. Now, given that virtually all previous applications have been granted, it's fair to expect that these latest requests will also be approved. So, with that out of the way, who exactly is facing the warrants being sought, and what are the charges? Well, Khan, the ICC's prosecutor, is seeking arrest warrants against 2 Israelis, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, on the basis that he has reasonable grounds to believe that they bear criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the Gaza Strip. These include the starvation of civilians, willful causing of great suffering, cruel treatment, willful killing, murder, intentional attacks against civilians, persecution, and more. Concurrently, Khan is seeking arrest warrants against 3 top Hamas figures: Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader in Gaza, Mohammed Deif, head of Hamas's military wing, and Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas's political bureau. Khan says that he has reasonable grounds to believe that they bear criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity, both in Israel and Palestinian territory, including extermination, murder, taking hostages, rape and sexual violence, torture, cruel treatment, and more. Now, it's important to highlight that the charges being sought are not exhaustive, so further warrants could still be requested going forward. For example, Khan makes clear that his office is still advancing other inquiries, including into sexual violence during the October 7th attacks, and into Israel's large-scale bombing campaign. But you might be thinking, Israel's not a party to the International Criminal Court, so does the ICC have jurisdiction in this case? Well, back in 2021, the ICC ruled that yes, it does have jurisdiction over what it calls the situation in the state of Palestine. Because whilst Israel is not a member state, Palestine is and has been since 2015. As such, the ICC has jurisdiction over crimes committed on Palestinian territory, even by people from non-member states like Israel. Simultaneously, it can also prosecute Palestinians for crimes committed outside of Palestinian territory, for example, on Israeli territory. That's why the ICC can issue arrest warrants relating to Hamas's October 7th attacks in Israel, and Israel's subsequent military offensive in Gaza. It's this same principle that gives the ICC jurisdiction over Russia's actions in Ukraine, despite Russia not being a party to the court. Nevertheless, Israel strongly rejects the notion that its actions in Gaza fall under the ICC's jurisdiction. And this is a position also held by the US and other allied countries, which say that the ICC's jurisdiction cannot apply because Israel is not a member and Palestine is not a state. Anyway, how have Hamas and Israel reacted to the news? Well, both are unhappy. Hamas strongly condemned the proposed charges against its leaders, saying that the decision equates the victim with the executioner, and that the warrant requests for the Israeli politicians had come 7 months late. Meanwhile, politicians in Israel have also reacted furiously. War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, a political rival of Netanyahu, called the proposed charges against Netanyahu and Gallant a deep distortion of justice and blatant moral bankruptcy, and that it was outrageous to equate Netanyahu with Hamas's Sinwar. Israel's foreign minister, meanwhile, called it a historic disgrace and said that he would open a specialized command center to fight the ICC's decision, which he said was intended to deny Israel the right of self-defense. For what it's worth, the ICC prosecutor's statement says that, like all states, Israel has the right to defend its population, but this does not absolve it from complying with international law, adding that the means Israel chose to achieve its aims in Gaza are criminal. Netanyahu himself has called it a moral outrage of historic proportions and accused prosecutor Khan of being one of the great anti-Semites in modern times. It's clear, though, that the prosecutor, who was elected to the position in 2021, having been nominated by the British government, was anticipating attacks on his office's credibility, and he took steps to try and counter them. For example, he announced the warrant requests whilst flanked by the American and British lawyers who oversaw the day-to-day running of the investigation, and also appointed a panel of experts to advise and assess his conclusions in the case. Anyway, assuming that these warrants are approved, what are the chances that Netanyahu, Gallant, or any of the three Hamas leaders actually end up on trial in The Hague? Well, to be honest, the chances are very slim. The ICC does not have a police force or enforcement mechanism, and instead it's the obligation of the court's 124 member states to arrest individuals facing warrants should they set foot on their territory. This would severely limit the travel options for Netanyahu and co. And as you can see from the map, Europe would technically be off limits, as would South America, much of Africa, and elsewhere. But Netanyahu and Gallant, for example, could still visit the United States, given that it's not an ICC member, whilst Hamas's leaders would be safe in Turkey and Qatar for the same reason. However, even if arrest and prosecution seem like a distant and unlikely outcome, the arrest warrants are still massive news which will cause significant fallout. Firstly, they further damage Israel's contention that it is acting within international law, and it exacerbates Israel's increasing international isolation and makes Western support for Israel, both politically and militarily, even more contentious to maintain, especially when you consider that the country is already on trial at the ICJ, accused of genocide, and that the arrest warrant would put Netanyahu in an unenviable club of indicted world leaders, which includes Vladimir Putin, Muammar Gaddafi, and Omar al-Bashir. It may, though, briefly provide a moment of unity for Netanyahu and his wartime cabinet, which is on the verge of collapse, as well as providing a common cause for the US and Israeli governments, whose relationship has been deteriorating. In fact, US President Joe Biden responded to the news by describing the ICC prosecutor's decision as outrageous, adding that there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas, and that the US will always stand with Israel against threats to its security. Aside from Israel, there will also likely be a significant impact on the International Criminal Court itself, as it will be forced to fend off attacks from the likes of Israel and the US, which had a hostile position on the ICC even before this latest news. Now, we don't know exactly how the US will respond, but there have already been threats by Republican lawmakers of legislative reprisal against the ICC and its officials. This will likely widen the rift between the United States and other countries, especially in the global south, which view the US as taking a selective approach to the so-called rules-based international order. That's all for this video, but there's a whole world of TLDR content out there. You might not know it, but we actually have 5 different TLDR channels explaining news from the UK, Europe, and rest of the world, breaking down the latest developments in the business world, and also running through the day's most important news that you might have missed. TLDR has been doing this for more than 7 years now, so to celebrate our anniversary, we'd love it if you subscribed. Not only to this channel, but also to any others that interest you, and they're all linked in the description. Our whole purpose is to make the world around you more understandable, to unpack the confusing parts of the news in a way that's interesting, factual, and entirely non-partisan. So if that's something you're into, then you've got 5 channels to enjoy. Thanks for your support over the last 7 years, it really means a lot.